Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Snowpiercer. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with what's happening on Wilfred's train and all that. So, obviously, we had that opening with Ruth where she talked about a previous love of hers that was gone. And, obviously, it's what always warmed him up. Always keep up that smile of yours, Ruthie, because it basically keeps him warm and keeps him going, until he, gets home or something like that. And I thought what's interesting because she kind of parallels that with basically how once, the code kind of sets in, the blood stops flowing to your limbs and stuff, because it starts your body tries to protect your organs and stuff like that even despite everything that happens at the very end, your heart's the last thing to go because it's still pumping, trying to make sure everything survives. So that even through the toughest of times, even under the toughest of conditions, that your heart still finds a way to kind of go through, pursue, and persevere is the word I'm looking for. I thought that was kind of beautiful, a metaphorical sense for obviously the human condition of continuing under the circumstances that they're under. Well, Ruth finds out that Javi's brought to the back of the train and they're working on something. And then later on when they use the word EMP, which they tested out, they only did 10% though. I was like, at first I was like, okay, I could see that definitely being used as a weapon, but I wasn't sure under what context. Because at first I was like, so would Wilfred use it to basically if the train doesn't cooperate, he's going to dump power for the rest of it? But I'm I was about to say, is that it, or would it be used against Andre and them? It turns out later on, no, it's to be used against Andre and them, because it's to lock them down, oh, cool, they're going to be defenseless, they're going to be without power, so it's going to make it a lot easier to kind of snatch them up type of situation. So that's kind of what he was aiming for. I do though, this episode definitely leans into it a little bit about, the Ruth and, Pike thing, because it's just kind of, they had these little moments, because he was basically kind of almost yeah, we need you, you're the leader of this, we kind of need you around, and there's these exchanges between them, they both know it's there, they're just not willing to admit it. And when the train had a bumpy little start, and they kind of she fell onto him, he's oh no, we're good, yeah, it's they were awkward around each other. It's oh, that's so sweet. But obviously there's a lot going on. Obviously, for one, LJ and Oz get engaged, and you're oh, that's super adorable, that's awesome. And the moment she's yeah, we should let Wilfred know, I'm why do you want to let him know? It's oh, because she's yeah, he's the closest thing I have to family. Well, other than you, it's but Oz was super not into it. But LJ, being who she is, as Oz calls her out later on for being a conniving person, she always has been. I mean, once again, are you really going to let it? I mean, I get it. I mean, that was already struggles in your relationship, but I can never let go of the fact is that what situation she was involved in with some murders and the taking of people's genitals. You were a part of that whole thing. I don't know, man. It just, I don't know. LJ's always been unhinged, so that's a lot of crazy, dude. That's a lot of crazy to be getting, not just being with, married to, especially considering how nuts she is about Wilfred. Oz isn't. Yes, Oz is an opportunist, but he's not always thinking. He was no, I legitimately love you, we built something for ourselves, but then you had to add Wilfred to the mix. For her, it's right, it's showing respect, it's showing loyalty, because she wants to be in his good favors, because right, Wilfred, he's God supreme here, so if we're in his favor, he'll trickle some of that down to us. She's even thinking long term, oh my god, we could end up being the king and queen of this train, we'll have so much power and stuff like that. But she didn't even want to fully take Oz's last name. She was oh, Folger, Oz's last name, her last name, then hyphenating it, and which is fine, but it's mainly because she's just later on, she's oh, I'm sorry, it just came out. It's just yeah, it just seemed and it just because also it seemed an idea Wilfred was okay with that bothered Oz so much too, because Oz is oh, I wanted it to be kind of a small thing, but it's no. LJ being LJ, it makes sense why she'd want it big, but also Wilfred wanted to use her wedding for something. You're what? It's because he needs it to be a prime example of oh, we're here, the beauty of unity and loyalty. The beauty, love, unity, loyalty. Like, that's kind of that whole thing. Like, it's like that Family Guy bit with just like, oh, this is so amazing. Smoke. Blah, 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 blah. Smoke. Blah, 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 blah. Are you smoking yet? It's kind of like supposed to be that subliminal messaging, which obviously in that's supposed to be like a very hyperbolized version of like, it's not so subtle messaging. This is that case of like, no, it's a love. We're basically renewing our vows of your vows of your commitment and loyalty to this train, which I love that he's like, this train. It's like, why beat around the bush? Just say, no, you're loyal to me. But I guess it's like, no, it's understood. If you're loyal to the train, you're loyal to me. Like, me and the train, we are one. So I guess that's all there is to it anyway. But still, I just find that so fascinating. And then there was also like that ball squeezing scene between Oz and Wilford. Like, a little crass to say, my balls hurt upon seeing that scene. I was like, it like made me feel I was like, I could legitimately feel my balls hurting. And then the sensation went away the moment the scene ended. I was like, that's super uncomfortable that scene could affect me physically. Like, I was like, that made me so uncomfortable. Because he was like, harder, and was like, Wilford's a bit of a masochist. We've kind of known that for a while, but it was like, it's like, what are your hands for? It's like, for crushing balls and also caressing your wife or something. I'm like, do we have to put those into, do you have to, like, equate those two to some, it's weird. It was a power move by Wilford, to make a point. But obviously, it's like, because LJ didn't like the way that Oz was calling her out for being conniving. And I love Wilford being like, let me guess. He said that I was co-opting your wedding and stuff like that, didn't he? I was like, Wilford's very good at getting inside of people's heads and knowing exactly what buttons to push to get people to do what he needs them and wants them to do. But LJ's all happy about it because, like, one, it's like, hey, this is an opportunity for her to come out looking and smelling like roses. She'll be like, we'll be the royal family, rather, the loyal family of the, especially for her, she's like, yeah, the older people are dying out. There's not too many younger people about their age. They're, like, in that middle, like, range age-wise. Amongst the train, so it's like, right, they have a special place amongst it and stuff like, because it's almost like, the old generation is going to be dying off, it's going to be up to us to kind of fill that void once the older people, like, die off, and we'll be the ones kind of representing the younger generation running the train or something like that, once again, king and queen of this train. So I would actually expected a little bit more in the sense of, I thought Wilford had other like, obviously just rather than what it's supposed to symbolize, because he's giving everyone like, hey, because that's what I'm like, last episode I was like, how are people who were siding with Wilford okay with this? Because I guess it's like, right, we're only under these circumstances because I guess he's punishing us for like what others did, but it's like, no, like in the long run, we're all good. But I'm like, once again, there's no like, I guess, like, obviously, some people, those who are really loyal, have gotten a lot more benefits, but it's like, once again, there is no first, second, or third, or tails. There are just the working class now, right? So, that's why I'm like, why so many people celebrating that? But I guess it's like, right, you give people enough, and it's that thing of, almost like a Stockholm Syndrome, an abusive relationship of like, I'm sorry for hurting you, but, like, here, like, it's all good, I promise you, it's never going to happen again, as long as you're loyal to me, as long as you do what I tell you to do, we won't have any problems. And it's like, right, you're so deprived of everything that once you get scrapped, you're like, yeah, thank you, sir, I love you, type of thing, like, because I'm like, why are so many people happy? Like, yeah. I mean, because it gives them an excuse, like a break from everything. We get to live some luxury. I love that, like, Wilford was like, get the cake maker. It's like, well, you threw him in compost. Well, get him out of there. I'm like, I love that. Makes you wonder, does he go back to compost immediately after finishing the cake and stuff like that? They never talk about it, but maybe like, hey, you do a good enough job. I wonder what did the cake maker. Maybe he was a part of the revolution, or maybe he just did something to piss Wilford off. I'm like, because I was looking at the cake maker, I was like, I don't think he's familiar, but maybe he is. But I'm like, what did you do to get into combos? Did you just get on Wilford's bad side? Nevertheless, it's interesting, just how what that wedding meant. It was kind of a sweet moment where it still was LJ and Oz at the end, but it's still the connotation of it's Wilford's. You know, because even he said like, we're getting married, because he used it as a platform to get what he wants. Obviously, Zara tried to get in contact with Javi because of, You know, because Pika's like, yeah, Ruth wants to talk to him, and Zara's like, he won't even talk to me. It's like, and ever since that dog, and I love that line from Pike being like, yeah, we all have our scars. And I think it's meant to be a dig at Zara because she's the one who continues to manage to not have any scars, like whereas everyone else around her kind of suffers, you know, because she gets the silver lining of the deals and stuff. But she manipulated Javi into seeing Ruth. Granted, he didn't know he was seeing Ruth at the time. Because Ruth was like, no, Ruth, you're supposed to be on the train. It's like, no, I've been here running things, helping out the passengers. He's the one that let her know about the EMP. So Pike, Ruth, and Light were back there. And I love that Pike was like, yeah, so I promised her that you'd be able to do something about this. And she's like, what? Dismantle an EMP? He was like, yeah. Because he was trying to be like, I told her I had a person for it. Like, almost being like, Light, don't let me down. This is going to put me in, like, Ruth's good graces. And that means, like, you know, maybe we could get, you know, I want to make her happy. I want to do everything for her. But obviously, Kevin, being suspicious, decided to go to the back of the train. But Ruth sacrifices her because it's like, yes, if I do this, they're not going to they're going to look at me as a gift horse in the mouth. Because it's like, oh my God, Ruth, like, that's all Kevin's going to think about because it's going to put him in good favor with Mr. Wilfred, but because he was always second fiddle to Ruth. Like, Ruth was always kind of like the special one, so it's like taking her down a peg or two, like, is also kind of like a little bit of a middle finger to her. But obviously Ruth leaves everything at the Pike because she's like, I know you'll do it, like, I know, like, you'll do this, like, once they get me, they won't even bother looking anywhere else because it's going to be like, oh my God, I'm the grand prize. So all the while that's all happening, back on Snowpiercer, obviously we learn a little bit more about Asha, which part of me was like, because I was thinking, like, is Asha from New Eden? Just because that's what I thought the storyline was going to be. She's saying that basically they stayed near, like, a reactor and they were basically using the radiation to well, they were wearing radiation suits, but eventually, like, using that to heat themselves, like, they were frozen in for, like, 8 years. She talks about it, like, basically, like, a couple years ago, marauders came, killed some, the others died from, like, radiation and stuff. So she's the only one that survived. She's like, eventually she gave up counting the years because it's like, right, no hope was coming. Because I was about to say, like, it makes sense why she would know about Snowpiercer, considering, like, Snowpiercer is such a large international thing and what it represented. It was the last glimmer of hope. So her being like, what, wait, Snowpiercer's still alive? And it's like, yeah, well, this is Snowpiercer. It's like, oh, where's Mr. Wilford? That's complicated. There's actually 2 trains. She's like, wait, what? You explain your circumstances, I'll explain all of this. It's just going to be a lot to take in all at once. So, yeah, I wonder, did he ever get into explaining all that happened? But basically, Andre did explain to her, like, right, like, what you think of, like, the worst of humanity. Yeah, like, we haven't evolved from that. Like, in fact, it's still been an ongoing issue for the past couple years on Snowpiercer, so, you know, but for her, it's like, yeah, but despite all that, you still saved me. You could have just left me to die. You just took whatever I had. It's like, why did you? And he's like, I'm just glad I did. Because he did have his vision because of her. Which I love that he does tell Bess, and she's like, yeah, you probably shouldn't tell anyone else that. I mean, it's like, yeah, you even said it yourself. You were near death. You were hallucinating. But he saw a tree that he's like, I've never heard it. It's like some blood something tree that it's like, it's in the area that Ben is saying, like, hey, this area might be it looks like the most promising area, because looking through the data, basically, things are getting warmer, but not at a fast enough rate that it's like, oh, we can stay here long enough for it to eventually warm up and we'd be good. It's like, no, it still take like a century at best for these areas to warm up. The rest of the world is, but we need a hot spot that's hospitable, because also they need to bring something to, like, dispute Wilford back. So if they do that, you know, he loses a little bit of his, like, reach and control. Like, if it's like, no, there is hope outside of the train. He's got so much of a hold on people because Snowpiercer is supposed to be all there is. So if you find out there's more, it lessens your grip. Like, that's the point. That's why he was so against Melanie, you know, because he's a tyrant. He doesn't want to give up any of his power, obviously. But this seems like their last hope. Like, right, because we can't go back to Snowpiercer empty-handed, which Andre was like, well, we're not. Like, we are, like, at the very least, I think having a survivor probably helps, but I think he was more so referencing, like, what was in his head, because he went through a whole bunch of books and stuff like that trying to find this, and it, like you said, it's in that was it New Guinea? Is that where it is? The area that they're looking into, like, that tree grows there, and once again, Bess is like, don't tell anyone about that. So Andre's kind of like, yeah, he's probably going to be like, right, after Bess's reaction, it's like, I definitely can't tell anyone, but it's going to be his biggest motivation. And I think for him, he like, I owe that vision and stuff to you. Like I said, I'm curious about Asha because I feel like there's definitely more to her story. Like I said, I don't know whether she's lying or telling the truth, but like she got around that greenery and she's pouring water on it and she's smelling the soil and it just kind of like, but then all of a sudden it triggers her and she rips up the plant and you're like, I don't know, like someone who was around a radiated place you would think would be a little more appreciative of the green. So I'm like, it's probably like, maybe there's some truth to her story, but maybe not. Maybe that, because she was saying like basically it was like 30 some of them that survived there. And so I'm like, could there be more to this? I don't know. I just, like I said, I guess because it is, I am so stuck in my head believing that she's from New Eden. I don't know whether that's something that was referenced in a trailer, why that's stuck in my head. That like I was under the impression that's what it was, because I equated like, oh, like them looking for New Eden plus this mysterious person who just happened to survive for the past 8 years. You know, because Ben was like, oh yeah, like, he justifies, like, yeah, you lock yourself in, feed off some of that, like, radiation, like, keep yourself heated, like, you're good. And you, like, sparingly, like, eat stuff, you could survive. So, we'll have to wait and see and get some confirmation on that. I also love the whole Andre and Josie thing of like, oh, so we're going to talk about before? She's like, oh, when you both almost time. He's like, no, like, we kiss. And she's like, oh, no, like, he's like, yeah, because Zara got a baby on the way, plus I made a promise to Zara. It's like, no, we don't have to talk about it. He's like, good, yeah. It's like, well, it's complicated, because it's like, yeah, because, well, running into Zara again is complicated, especially considering, like, well, there was an Andre and Josie thing, and things have happened, and sparks have kind of got renewed there between them. It's like, there's a lot. It's about to get complicated, potentially. So, we'll see how that all ultimately ends up playing out. But, I do love that, like, obviously, it's like, cool. So we have a choice now. Do we get on the main line or do we get on the second line? Because it's like we need to find out if there are signs that give us signs on whether or not Wilfred's in front of us or behind us. But if they get within satellite range, it means they will be in satellite range as well. So not only would they know where Wilfred is, he'll know exactly where they are. So that's kind of like the double-edged sword of it all. Andre was saying later on, like, oh, we should get on the second line just to kind of get a better satellite view and stuff. And even Best being like, was there any other motivation reason for that? He's like, no, we just have potentially have more options on the second line. And it's like, Bess is definitely going to be eyeing him up like, you're supposed to be the leader of this, so, like, we can't have you being, like, basically out of your mind, so... That is the thing, because Bess does give a justified reason, being like, you probably read about it in high school, and you being near death, like, it pulled some part of it, like, out of your memories, like, oh, here's something you think you didn't know anything about, but actually you know... It's like, he's like, the vision seems so clear, he's like, it was almost like I was there, I felt it, like, it might... That's why I'm like, what could that be? Like, could it just... Where did that come from? Because that just seems weird to just throw it out there like, oh, there's some vision. And like... But I was about to say, like, not unless it's a repressed memory, but I'm like, what could that mean? Like... Because why would he know that area? Like, but it seemed like a memory more than just, like, a vision. Like, the viewing of it seemed like someone was there, and he was there, like, seeing it through, like, his own eyes or something. So, like, either it's a repressed memory, or... I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. Maybe it is just straight up, no, it is a vision. I feel like that's so... Because it is, like, a very, like, science-fictional show. But so that's why I'm like, for him that... Like, granted, just because other stuff I've seen, I won't spoil anything, has kind of hinted, like, oh, just because you see something... And, things could work out just because maybe there's just something in your brain that just happened to work out the figure, maybe it is something you saw. Maybe it is just kind of like the neurons, like, and the synapses in your head just connecting in the right way, and it just led to you picking, like, maybe it is just some random coincidence. But, maybe there's something more there. I don't know. We'll find out if that's the case, but it's definitely going to make Andre seem crazy, so he better not tell anyone, because the plan is to reunite with Snowpiercer, reunite all of Snowpiercer, and then go do this, but it's also like, once again, probably don't want to let anyone know that you're saying that, because you're just going to seem even crazier, and then people are going to be like, man, maybe we should have never followed Andre. You know, it's like, right, he was near death, so some people probably justify being like, yeah, man was near death, so cut him some slack. So we'll see. But other than that, I do like, you know, Ruth's conversation with Wilfred. He's like, oh, if only you were still loyal. She's like, I am loyal, you know, to Snowpiercer, like, not just to you. And she talks about, like, loyalty can only get you so far. It needs to also be loyalty from, like, love from the people. Like, it's like, no, like, your kind of love isn't enough. Like, the way you want people to love you, that's not how you go about things. Like, the way, obviously, because Ruth sees things from a certain perspective. I even love that he brings up the thing where he freezes people's arms off. He's like, yeah, it was meant to be a deterrent. It meant to scare people. Never actually meant to use it, but you, 13 times. And she's like, yes, and I will have to pay for my sins. And he was like, oh yeah, also, like, I'm going to make sure they go higher on your arm, because that way a prosthetic won't even be possible. And she's like, good, because I wouldn't wear one anyway. Because I think after everything that she's done, like, for example, Winnie's mom, it's like, right, after Winnie's mom, like running into Winnie again really, like broke her and made her realize, like, how wrong she was to handle things the way she did. And so for her, it is a situation of, like, if I have to, like, lose my arm, then go for it, then it'll be worth it, because this is a price I have to pay for, one, fighting for Snowpiercer, two, and also, like, fighting for what I believe, but also, this is my punishment for all the people I've hurt in the process. Like, I took Winnie's mom away from her because of this very thing, so it's like, no, if this is what must happen to me, then I don't deserve a prize. Like, it's like, no, I will go around with no arm then, if she obviously survives, because Winnie's mom obviously didn't survive it, so. It's, but Ruth but I love, at the same time, it's like, cool, like, trying to, like, figure out how to disarm it. They can't, and so Big Boy, God, was it just Big Boy or was it Tall Boy? I think, whatever the case may be, just, like, rips off a thing, activates it, it's that full power crap. Luckily, they were able to just throw it out the back of the train. It ignites. Luckily, it was close enough. Obviously, they hit the train, but it didn't get the full force of the EMP. Luckily for Snowpiercer, it allowed them to ping Wilfred and them. It's like, cool, we know where they are. They don't know where we are. All right, Wilfred hates surprises. Let's give him one. I'm like, yeah. And so just as Ruth is about, I was like, come on, guys. Come on. And they get there just in time before, because Ruth was like, come on, let's just get it over with then. And she was about to, her arm, because it's like, right, like, this rat was amongst us. And it's like, right, I had a way that this war, we were going to go to battle. This way it wasn't going to get bloody, but now it's going to get super bloody, and it's because of her, because it would have been a thing of, I will shut down their Snowpiercer, we'll reunite, they won't have the power, they won't have any advantage, they'll be dead in the water, essentially, and it'll make it easier just to come swoop them up and take them over. But it's like, nope. Snowpiercer rolls up parallel to him and is like, hell yeah. It's like, alright, battle stations, ladies and gentlemen. So, it's definitely going to be really interesting to see where the next episode takes us, because things are about to heat up. Also, luckily, Ruth walked away from this with both arms intact. We'll see how this all plays out, what Andre and them have planned, and how this is all going to play out. We'll ultimately have to wait and see. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.